Saya akan sampaikan ucap pertama saya pada pagi ini dalam bahasa Inggeris. Para hadirin sekalian, the role of research for water sector sustainability in facing the impact of climate change is the topic of my keynote today. And my presentation today will be as in the following outline: state of water sector in Malaysia, climate change impact on water sector, research role to enhance water sector sustainability, and will then summarize in the conclusion of where and the direction that we are going. The overview of the state of water sector in Malaysia is very much well known, and I think it's been presented in many conferences and seminars. As everyone well know, that we are a country with a lot of rain, 2,800 millimeters per year, and with that it translates into about 971 billion cubic meters per year, and 6% infiltrates into the ground, 43% evaporates, 51% is the surface runoff that translates into the water resources that we use for domestic as well as the industry and the agriculture. So essentially, the surface water is what we are mostly dealing with, and as we all know, we have a tremendous amount of groundwater which is hardly utilized. Moving on into the state of the water sector in Malaysia, we find that we have no problems with water availability in terms of the quantity of it, but we do have issues when it comes to quality, and quality is usually the issues when it comes to urban water supply. And we have, through the National Water Resources Policy study in 2011, determined that the figures, well, it's clear for you to see on this on the slide that the availability is not really a problem, but what we have here is that it's how do we distribute this equitably among the sectors. So the projected water demand in Malaysia, if you can look at projected water demand in Malaysia, largest demand is for potable water, about 61%. Second biggest water demand is for agriculture purposes, namely irrigating paddy, and the largest paddy irrigation scheme is managed by MADA in Kedua and Perlis and IDA in various other states, Pahang, Perak and Selangor. So we have agriculture water which we take for granted, and it is surprising that even in our food security policy, the national food policy, that the emphasis on water security is not yet what you call placed on a high pedestal. So we need to think and not forget about agriculture. We are only taking agricultural water for granted. Okay, water supply. We have extensive water supply. Almost all the states have more than 98% coverage, and the only state in Peninsula that has low coverage is Kelantan. So I think this is all well known to everyone, that Kelantan is the only state that has more than 90%, 90% of the water supply comes from groundwater, whereas the rest of the country is all on surface water. So there are a lot of facts that I can present, and it will take up a tremendous amount of time. So I will just probably focus on the more important things. And that for years we have been talking about managing water properly, trying to integrate between the sectors, and also to ensure that every sector realizes the importance of another sector to the sector that you're in. And we have also determined that certain states will face scarcity certain times of the year, despite the fact that you have this tremendous amount of rainfall that comes in and sufficient storage. So the dynamics of water apparently is realized, but to take the necessary action, the holistic action to manage it, requires some effort, both politically as well as in terms of the management of water. Alright, so basically it's a recap of many of the presentations that I've presented in the past when it comes to water sector as a whole. Right, more on this before I go into the gist of today's presentation. The state of water sector in Malaysia when it comes to wastewater. Again, I'm presenting facts which you can easily get from the book that we are selling out there, Air dan Pembentungan, which is at the Narim store. Please get the book, it's got a lot of facts. The English version will be coming out within a year, and that will be basically the same as what the Malay version is already out, and you can get it from our stand. And the English version will come out at the end of the year, and it takes some time for us to bring in all the information to produce that book. So it has a lot of facts in it, and these are essentially taken from the book. So you can see this, and I can go through them one by one. I'll just read them off. Public sewage treatment plant 7,114, and private sewage treatment plants 4,119. So yeah, you can see that we have all the systems in place. We are not far from the rest of the world in terms of technology, but we still have issues with the last mile, whereby we need existing systems or existing communities to connect their system to central systems that we have built in Malaysia. Okay, again, more of the general story about water, about national policies, federal acts, state enactment and ordinance. 44 policies that can impact the water sector in one way or another, beginning with the National Water Resources Policy 2012, which is currently being reviewed. 74 acts which can impact water sector in one way or another. 70 state enactments and ordinances that can impact the water sector in one way or another. All proves that it is a complex issue when it comes to policies, acts and enactment. State governments are all now reviewing their water enactments. State governments are now beginning to charge for abstraction for utilization of natural resource by the industrial sectors, as well as manufacturing sector as well. So you can see that water is complex, and water requires a lot of input from technical services and also from the research community. Climate change impact on water sector. Narim has been going around the country, bringing the results of our climate change monitoring program to the masses, to the state governments, and let me start with global climate change impact. As you can see, the projection for different scenarios are presented in this slide. There is going to be an increase in sea level, and the global projection by IPCC, based on the latest AR6 or the assessment report 6, shows an increase in the temperature and sea level. Temperature will increase, range from 1.5 degrees Celsius to 4 degrees Celsius, and the sea level rise based on representative concentration pathways will range between 0.4 to 0.8. Right, here are the images that captures those dimensions. Annual surface temperature, you can see it rising from 1.29 to 1.37 in 2050, and in 2100, 1.85 to 1.93 degrees Celsius. So there is about maybe about 2 degrees Celsius increase in annual surface temperature. Annual rainfall, we will see an increase up to 11% and 14% in 2100. Sabah and Sarawak figures are pretty much the same, but you can see quite a significant rise for Sabah, where the 2100 projection is 25% increase. Sea level rise, it's an average 1.7 meters. That's the working figure that we use for coastal erosion design, and it's what we recommend the agencies that deal with coastal infrastructures include in their design deliberations. The projected climate change impact based on Narim 2019 is well published, and I'll just read off the notes that have been prepared for me. Annual surface temperature will increase by about 1.33 degrees in 2050 and 1.89 degrees Celsius in 2100 for Peninsular Malaysia. So surface temperature increase are slightly higher for Sabah and Sarawak. And then in terms of the annual rainfall, it will increase by 14 to 16% in 2100 for Peninsula and Sarawak. So that's to summarize the whole climate change projection. Slides that are essentially presenting the scenarios for the future. But you'll see that all these that I've mentioned will then translate into increased river flows, flood extents, and also extending the dry spells that we normally get during the dry seasons. And for the future, changes in rainfall intensity. We have seen that in the past 12-24 months, an increase occurrences of flood. We've seen floods in Selangor, Terengganu, and the unprecedented Gunung Jerai event of 18th August. And then recently, Bukit Merah, which went down almost bone dry. You will see that these occurrences are going to continue, and then there is no way we can actually predict when the next one will come. So Gunung Jerai was an unprecedented event, and as you well know, JKS has a definition for floods. One is the flash flood, the one that resides within 6 hours, and there is the monsoonal floods, the one that take longer to reside, maybe a week or so. And then monsoonal floods occur during the monsoon, whereas flash floods can occur at any time. In Kuala Lumpur, it's almost every week or every month, depending on the rainfall. So the hydrologists and the flood managers all understand that 65 or 60 mm of rainfall within 3 hours is bound to cause flood somewhere in the Klang Valley. So that's an accepted fact. But no one could have predicted the Gunung Jerai event of 18 August because it was a different kind of flood. So now the terminology that is arising it's called debris flood, or according to some it's called banjir puing. So that name has been bandied around, but we've not decided yet what it should be called. But essentially, it captures floods in the upper catchment, and the Gunung Jerai flood carried a lot of sediments from the foot of Gunung Jerai, causing a lot of sedimentation. And in the town of Yan, post-flood, the sedimentation in the streets of the town was about up to a foot thick. So there's a lot of sediments coming down the river. It also points out that when it comes to disaster, you can never be 100% sure that whatever you install is going to serve you for a indefinite amount of time. It requires you to understand the dynamics of disaster. It requires to look into what caused it and what can be done to prevent an event of similar magnitude. Yeah, but you cannot even guess what could happen in the future, but you can only design for something maybe slightly bigger. So if you want to design for, right now we are working on an ARI, average recurrence interval of 100 years. We can just say that quantitatively we should design for something ARI 200, but who is to say that that will also work? Hence, some countries in the West are designing for much higher return periods, but they have the benefit of long-term data collection. Our rainfall only goes back about 100 years. So whatever we've designed greater than 100-year ARI as a basis is basically a qualitative figure. Build something bigger, build something better. So that's the principle of it. We are seeing increased rainfall intensity. So banjir puing or debris flood has a almost direct relationship to an increased intensity, high intensity rainfall. So with high intensity rainfall, then you will get higher flows or faster runoff, faster concentration of flows, and a big gush of water flowing downstream. Slopes will also play is a factor to be considered, and when you cannot predict when the next one is going to happen, the best thing you can do is to be preventive, and when you want to be preventive, you must then educate the community living in high-risk areas to be prepared and to be aware of the signs of an incoming banjir puing. Again, not always obvious to people. Right, I would like to say more about the Baling incident, but even now we don't have sufficient data to really comment with confidence on what really happened in Baling. We know that there was rain, we knew that the flow in the river was high, but we still need to find out more about what happened in the upper catchment, what was the development like, what actually changed in terms of the slopes of the upper catchment that caused such a large amount of water to be concentrated in such a short time. Alright, sea level rise. In the past we have heard some institutions declaring that certain states, certain cities in Malaysia will be underwater. Well, technically, if you anticipate a certain increase in sea level and then you minus the existing ground level and you find that it's positive, that means it will be underwater. Technically, it's a simple assessment, but there is the dynamics of the flooding is not always included in the analysis, which means to say that we at NARIM have a different type of risk map in comparison to what other institutions or other global institutions produce. Now, among the frequent impacts of rising sea level is one is coastal flooding, but as we are seeing that we believe the first indications of sea level rise will appear in how often you maintain jetties in the coastal areas. So along our coastal areas, we have a very large community of coastal fishermen. They build their own jetties. Jabatan Perikanan build their jetties. JKR build jetties for LKIM. And you will see that the maintenance of these jetties or the requirements for repairs will be increasing. That will be a sure sign of sea level rise. We are seeing a lot of bund breaches along the west coast of Peninsular Malaysia due to storm surges, and NARIM is also doing a study on storm surge, and we are also seeing these incidents of storm surges occurring more frequently, with many incidences of bunds being overtopped, that leading to erosion of those bunds and at times breaches in the embankments, causing flooding of the adjacent land. Projected sea level rise of 2,100 of 0.7 will definitely cause our mud flats to be further inundated, causing a coastal squeeze whereby our mangroves will be trapped between our coastal embankments and the sea, and that is going to cause stress on the ecosystems that survive in our mangrove forest. So these are the implications of sea level rise in the next years leading to 2100. Right, now where does that put NARIM, and where is the research, what is the research role that we play? Okay, here are the variables, the issues, the effects and the solutions to just create the background for our discussion. You have temperature and you have rainfall, and the issues are just too much water, too little water. You have the sea level rise, and you have pollution. Now, water pollution is not necessarily naturally occurring, and most of our cases of water pollution are anthropogenic or man-made, and the effects are towards water security, food security, damage to properties, economic loss, and stress to the aquatic ecosystem, and definitely human health. And the solutions in general are to look into whether we can improve management practices, monitoring practices, treatment technology, restoration and protection. Now at NARIM, we realize that research plays an important role in enhancing water sector sustainability, and currently there are large gaps of knowledge to support water sector sustainability, research or science plays a critical role from the projection of the climate change parameters based on different scenarios to the issues and to predict and assess the impacts of water security. Now, some more images here to illustrate the role of science or research and information. In the 12 Malaysia plan, the major challenges are people, infrastructure, finance and information. I guess this goes through all Malaysia plans. And we're looking at lack of ownership towards water resources, insufficient and unsustainable water infrastructure to support growth, poor financial sustainability of water industry and high dependence on public funding, and the lack of data-driven and science-based decision making. So we are there at the bottom right corner. Lack of data-driven and science-based decision making. That essentially pushes us to look for research opportunities in getting things right, getting the right information, getting the right data. Now, many people say that in Malaysia it's management that is the issue, and the jurisdictions that differ between state and federal governments are also key for us in making the right decisions at the right time. Underpinning all this must be science-based decision making, data that is trustworthy, research that is impactful. Now, we have a lot of challenges in trying to get funding for research, and we realize that we are spending barely 0.9% of the budget that we have under the ministry, and it is a challenge for us to work hard to get more funding. And when we get more funding, then we'll be more assured of the scientific analysis that we do, and we can then present an unbiased position entirely based on the technicalities of things and the science of it. Now, the research opportunities that arise for us are in projecting and forecasting, prediction of impacts, monitoring and detection techniques, methods, and of course technology, improving the technology that's already out there. The 12th Malaysia Plan essentially identifies information, and it says that there's a lack of data-driven and science-based decision. So we are the ones trying to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. But we are seeing challenges when we deal with state governments. Sometimes data is sometimes restricted. Data is not normally flowing freely between agencies, and that is a challenge. And this is realized, I think, by many research institutions. There is some form of secrecy, but we cannot explain what that secrecy is. So we have to make an effort to make data flow between agencies, between research institutions, between universities and the government. There is a fear that data may be misused, data may be misrepresented, data may be used for political gains, for political agendas, but there must be somewhere some puristic thinking that would make us all share the data freely in the interest of the nation, in the interest of the rakyat. Ladies and gentlemen, CASA has come up with the National Water Innovation Roadmap. This is supported by this image is prepared by us, and it actually captures what we are doing. We are looking at clean rivers and increasing reserve margin, and making changes to how we look at rivers. Not all the rivers are polluted when they say that this river is polluted. We have not gone into segmentizing rivers and giving specific status to them. And currently, the way we report is that Sungai X is polluted, Sungai Y is not, Sungai W is class 1, Sungai R is class 3. But by right, rivers should be segmented and then given a particular rating or a score. That would be the right way. But this is the way it's being reported now, is just that one river, and you say that it's polluted, so everybody says that river is polluted. So Sungai Kelang is polluted, is it? You go to Hulu Kemensa, it's still nice and clear, but downstream in Shah Alam or in Kelang is not. It's never class 1. So I think you understand what I'm getting at. Right. How do we increase reserve margin? I think this topic has been discussed many times, and we just need, number one is we just have to have the resources first, and then we have to have the treatment plants able to produce or able to treat water to the quantity that is required for that particular area, and then able to store them in the appropriate places, so that when you have a sudden rise in demand, you have the reserves to come in. And not many states have probably up to 10% of reserve margin. Basically, most states are at the very minimum. Disaster risk reduction, I mentioned about disaster risk reduction. There are certain things that we are still looking at, and with the recent events of the flood of Taman Sri Muda, we realized that despite being very experienced in managing floods over the years and keeping the number of deaths very low, there are still things to be learned about major floods in urban areas. So there's a lot of there are differences in the dynamics of managing flood in an urban area as compared to in the rural areas or the less developed areas of the east coast of Malaysia. And you have a certain amount of assets, and these assets have to be mobilized in preparation of monsoon floods. But what happened on the 18th, 19th of December 2021 was again unprecedented, and still things to learn about what went wrong in terms of managing that particular incident. So we are now still gathering the information piece by piece and as accurate as possible, and sifting through the noise. You know, with every flood event you get information. Probably about 70% of those information cannot be relied upon. And that's another challenge of this new millennium, is that you have a lot of noise when the information comes in. So there's anecdotal, there is measured, there is images from individuals, satellite images. You're not sure when it was taken. So another challenge to researchers is to sift through all this and determine what is actually the facts and what are actually conjectures and guesses or speculations. Right, water financing is new, and we are trying to get more people from the private sector into investing in water, in the water industry. And that is also another challenge, because we have to position it in such a way that it is attractive. So in looking at examples overseas, we find that the water financing works in certain places where you have communities that rely entirely on the private sector to provide the water services. But we are more of state by state or federal territory by federal territory, and not exactly the same. You're not exactly comparing apples to apples when it comes to taking in the examples from overseas and then applying them to our local context. So the National Water Innovation Roadmap essentially looks at what role that each agency can play in introducing new ideas into the way that they work. And in NARIM, our focus is pretty much cut out. It is more into looking at the way to measure the solutions that we can produce, and what changes that we can make to design to improve the way we approach disaster risk reduction. My next slide here is to show the adaptation framework for water sector based on climate change. And there's a lot of data that is required for us to look into changing the way the industry functions and changing the way we design underwater resources. You can look at this image, you see the connection lines. The connections are not very easy to follow. Everything is linked actually. So this gets even more complicated when you bring in, if you name the sectors one by one. So basically here we're just saying water resources, water service industry, water-related disaster, and even that, you can see that those lines are crossing each other. You have to find the connection and link them, and then ensure that when you produce a solution for one, it does not then affect existing solutions for another. So let me give you an example. We widen rivers, we deepen rivers. But in recent years, we find that when we do that, you may solve the flood problem from the upstream flows, but then you have climate change bringing in sea levels rising, will bring in saline intrusion further upstream. So do we still continue with widening and deepening rivers? And what other options have you got? You may want to build barrages across the river. But when you build a barrage across the river, what does that do to local fishermen? Now if I'm not a fisheries person, but if you have migrating fish, then the barrage again will become a restriction. So this is just a simple example of how you come up with a solution for one, but you then have a detrimental effect on another. Now, NWICE completed a study developing the CC adaptation framework for water sectors, and the focus is given not only on two sectors that were presented earlier, but also on water-related disaster to ensure preparedness for such events. So let's see how we're responding to future climate change. Now, I realized that I think I'm running out of time because there's a lot to talk about, and I'm given about 30 minutes. So I will try my best to finish this quickly. Now, for the future, again, there's a lot of information here, water adaptation technologies. Looking at water pollution, you have too much water, too little water, unknown climate risks, disaster preparedness, and sea level rise. So you know that you have to build better. So building infrastructure for shoreline protection is, I guess, unavoidable. And now we are looking at to build with nature, and we find that green infrastructure will be the way to go. Building with nature is a big program in Europe and probably in some other parts of the world as well. But we have to accelerate it. We are going at a very slow pace. So we know that the mangroves are important, greens or trees are important, but the programs that we carry out take a long time to deliver the result. So we have to accelerate. So that's the watchword now. We have worked a lot on trying to improve response to disaster, and that ties in with IR 4.0, coming up with instrumentation that can give you information in real time, and then working with the communications and trying to get it to tell us immediately. And in Malaysia, under the JPS's program, there were lots of challenges that we realized when it comes to installing stations in the deep forest and trying to get that information to the central, to the Pusat Ramalan Amaran Banjir, and processing that to produce the predictions for future floods. And the technological challenges opens a lot of opportunities for local manufacturers to work in terms of coming up with systems, coming up with instrumentation and sensors. So we are all very aware of the situation where of floods, too much water, and to deal with the urban floods is probably the most difficult, because you have to look at how drainage systems function and to assess them very frequently to see whether they are functioning. Now, the JPS program on urban floods has been ongoing for years, but again, with the kind of rains that we are getting, it may not even last very long. Once you if you upgrade a certain drainage system, some areas will be difficult to deal with, like Klang, for instance, very flat, and you have a high tidal range in the port. So you are always most of the time underwater. And during the worst part of the year, which is in October, the water is always there and only drains out partially. And if I may allude to a certain situation that we realized for the Taman Sri Muda. So you realize that there was high tide in Klang, and you have heavy rain in Shah Alam and Klang as well, going down. But some people forget that prior to the event there was heavy rain in KL. So the flows from KL are coming down to Klang, and the flows in Klang want to go out to the sea, but there is high tide. And even when the tide goes down, the flows from Klang are going out, but the waters from KL has already arrived. So there was the scenario that we are still studying and trying to determine the temporal, how it worked in the sense of the timing of the floods, the timing of the high tide, and the rainfall in the upstream catchment of the Klang Valley. Okay, so those are the trailers for the future research that we're doing in terms of studying the floods of 18 December 2021. Okay, I have to rush through, I'm sorry, because I'm already running over time. Responses to future climate: identify the water adaptation challenge, explore the possible adaptation response options, and learn about relevant water adaptation technology options. So what we're saying is that there is several dimensions to it. We have national, sectoral, project-based, and also for the community. Now, when it comes to the resilience, it's the community that we have to work on. So whatever research we do, we are trying to transfer the knowledge that we have right straight down to the community. So what we call merakyatkan penyelidikan, hasil penyelidikan. Make it as simple as possible for the locals to understand. And it is a challenge actually, because a lot of our information, a lot of our programs, a lot of our plans that we design are not the language of the people facing the hazard, facing the disaster. So in order to bring up resilience, you have to make the information accessible and easily understandable. So when you design your RBM plans or your drainage master plans, and when it comes to the community, you must make the effort to write another document that serves the immediate people on the ground, the administrators in the district level, and the community itself. Okay, another familiar slide that we normally show on how we address water sector, and this is hydroclimate. This is on, sorry. Okay, this is about the strategies of trying to, how for us to improve. Okay, that's a bit too much information here. I think I'll skip it if you don't mind. Okay, this is an NRIM program, which is a research on climate change projection, hydroclimate data analysis accelerator. So the NHIDA is a global model, and the NHIDA is actually the downscaling of the global model. And that model is what we call NHIDA, and it's primarily developed for providing climate change and water-related information and technology. And this is an important tool for the different sectors. CC knowledge, or climate change knowledge, is crucial for present and future related business activities, engineering practices, and environment, particularly for sustainable development. So we have this system that actually tries to predict what's going to happen in the future, and it is a very challenging system to downscale the global model, and that requires computer resources as well. Right, NARIM is also embarking on improving census. This is our response to the drive on IR 4.0. Our biggest challenges are, of course, floods. So if you come to Malaysia, if you're a foreign student, you come to Malaysia to learn about floods. This is the best place to learn about floods. Just like for us to go to probably Japan to learn about tsunami. So come to Malaysia to learn about floods. Okay, so there is a stress, there's an emphasis on IoT, and this is the way that the technology is growing, and we have to respond accordingly. Now there is a huge gap in agriculture, as you all know that we also take agriculture for granted. We think that there's always going to be food, on our table. But the recent wars in Europe, the recent war in Europe has pointed to us that we are not spared from the impact of the global shortage of wheat and also on fertilizers. So we are feeling it, and we must respond accordingly. Right, research on water pollution, another challenge in the urban areas. JAS has been very active lately, handling the pollution which is occurring from time to time, and a lot of our community engagement is trying to deal with making people aware of the dangers of water pollution, how to prevent them. Right, the use of IoT is going to be growing tremendously, and Nahrim is interested to work with the industrial sector on testing new sensors and coming up with sensors that can help us bring in information or analyze pollution and analyze water, especially water pollution, very quickly. And we are, of course, have our own instruments that we have designed for that purpose. Research on climate change adaptation, especially on sea level rise. We have designed a few systems that we think can improve coastlines and as an alternative to the traditional hard structure options. We are very actively involved in mangrove replanting. I'll just go on to this. Yep. And this is part of nature-based solutions. This is going to be also the future of coastal protection in this country, particularly on mangrove areas. We know that in terms of biodiversity, mangroves are very diverse, and it is very important for us to preserve them. All right. I have to apologize that my presentation has gone well over time, and I guess I'll just have to go straight to the conclusion. Now, in conclusion, climate change is affecting the water sector and increasing the frequency and intensity both of droughts and storm events, while higher air temperatures necessitate greater water use for crop irrigation and livestock. Now, we have plenty of research gaps, and we are encouraging the nexus of the academy, government and industry in all the research, and we welcome collaborations with the private sector. Almost all of our research involves the universities. This is an exciting trend. Nahrim is signing multiple MOUs with many universities, and that's what we believe should be the way to go. Even foreign universities are contacting us, requesting for collaborations because they are interested in the dynamics of disaster management and pollution of water in this in our region. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that I have painted the role of Nahrim through the problems and issues that I showed in the slides, and I welcome your participation in research and development together with Nahrim and together with our collaborators. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, ni booth untuk produk inovasi saya dekat semasa NWICE 2022 dekat Kuala Lumpur Convention Center. So ni produk yang saya akan pertandingkan, raincoat, iaitu court based rainfall monitoring. So saya sudah prepare dalam laptop. Presentation ni sebenarnya tutorial YouTube untuk cara menggunakan raincoat. So boleh pergi ipasai YouTube untuk akses YouTube tutorial untuk cara menggunakan raincoat untuk rainfall monitoring. So kami ada ni banner, ini banner ipasa, and then kat sini ada juga di slide disediakan untuk QR code untuk YouTube tutorial dengan QR code untuk raincoat. So boleh akses data, boleh akses tutorial dengan untuk menjawab data-data berkaitan raincoat dengan rainfall monitoring lah. So kat sini kita ada poster guna template NWICE 2022 hingga NWICE National Water Innovation Conference and Exhibition. Sedang berlangsung sekarang. Hari ni hari kedua, 20 Julai 2022 dekat Pusat Convention Kuala Lumpur KLCC. So inilah poster dia sudah disediakan. Okay, I think that's all. White minimalist punya design untuk product innovation saya kat sini. So petang ni nanti ada evaluation oleh juri. I think that's all for me. Good luck everybody.
Ini yang buat kan? Okay. Presentation hari ni, kalau tak boleh present saya nyanyi je. Hari tu. Okay. Baik saya setuju masa, tapi sebab saya last kan. So bolehlah Ini dua betul? Okay. Untuk hari ini saya akan membentangkan kajian kepada pelaksanaan sistem consulted wireless sebagai alternatif pada sistem bendungan. Kajian ini sedang dijalankan dan masih belum lagi desain kepada top management, tetapi tak apa, saya hari ini adalah lebih kepada perkongsian. Okey, kajian ini di bawah
YouTube. Saya tengah mau minum air dari udara. Udara KLCC.
Rasa ada KLCC dah.
Udara KLCC. Mana lagi minum air udara KLCC? Okey, tekan hold, keluar air. Terbaik. Ni air dari udara KLCC. Ni semua dah try tadi.
Nanti kena buat air perahu pandang ke apa ke. Kena masuk sana.
Terbaik. Ni reveal. Okay, boleh beli siapa nak beli. Sengaja tak makan yang tea break pagi tu. Memang saya tak makan sebab nak simpan untuk makan ni.
Malam aku makan dah tea break sebab malam tak berapa suka.
Roti-roti macam tu je kan. Okay. Kuala Lumpur Convention Center. Lunch dia sehat semua. Seafood.